Dasha, Natalia, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have y'all here to talk about a subject that people probably don't want to confront in their financial lives, but is a very important topic. It is the topic of debt. We're going to talk about not only how we get into it, but more importantly, how we get out of it. I know we're recording right now around the holiday season. I think this is one of those things that comes up for people, especially during this time of year. Fun fact. Well, I don't know if this is a fun fact, but I found out recently that 28% of people are still paying off their holiday debt from last year. And we're about to head into the new holiday season. And I don't know about y'all, but that makes me feel all types of anxiety. So we're going to talk about the importance of confronting your situation, because even though it can feel like a lost cause, there are solutions to getting rid of your debt and to getting control of your financial life back. And we're going to talk about those things today with these two ladies who are experts in the field. Let's start off with some introductions. Dasha, tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is, of course, Dasha Kennedy. I'm a member of National Debt Relief Financial Wellness Board. I'm also the creator of The Broke Black Girl. I've been in the finance industry since I was about 19 years old. A lot of it was self-experience. I worked in the finance industry, but I learned very early that a lot of the information that I was getting introduced to, I really could not apply it to my life. So that started my personal finance journey, where I started documenting my journey and sharing it online.
And Natalia, how about you?
Hi, I am the Chief Compliance and Consumer Affairs Officer, formerly the Chief Client Operations Officer. I've been with the National Debt Relief for 14 years, and I've just seen how many people needed help. I'm a first-generation American, so I personally have my own stories. I'm just passionate about helping people get their financial lives together, and debt is at an all-time high. So it's really something we should talk about around the holiday season for sure.
Absolutely. I love that both of you have the experience of being what it's like to be on the other side of this equation, right? And so let's dive into those stories individually. Dasha, tell us about your journey with debt and how you came out on the other side.
Yeah, my first introduction to debt was through payday loans. I grew up in a city, a predominantly Black neighborhood, and payday loans were everywhere. It was something that was normalized, not only in my community, but also in my family. It was also just thinking that payday loans was the answer to just get us through 1 week to the next. But I learned very quickly that that's not true, because if it's an income issue, having the payday loan, you're not going to have the money or even want to give up the money when it's time to pay off the loan during your next pay period. So that was my original introduction to debt. It was a very scary process. It took me years to get out of where, really, hindsight being 2020, I never should have been there, but it took me years just to tackle a $500 payday loan because I got caught up in a cycle. When I think about what I had to do to get out of it, I had to learn how to be honest with myself. I had to learn to be vulnerable and know that I didn't have all the answers, that I needed some professional help. So it was definitely a scary time.
How did you learn about payday loans?
Seeing them everywhere. Even I remember as early as being in high school and getting off of my school bus and seeing these bright neon signs everywhere. From the time I got off of the bus to the time I got home, I know for a fact I was passing up 2 or 3. So I was seeing the neon signs, seeing the lines sometimes out the door, people coming and going. And that was my first introduction. So of course you get curious, you start asking questions, and when you don't know much, you think oh, okay, someone's giving you a loan without any major requirements. You just have to tell them, when you get paid. I thought that was the best thing ever. So my introduction was it being just placed right in front of my face. That was really how I learned about them.
Yeah, that environmental exposure is really how a lot of us learn about finances. I'm curious, what did you learn about debt from your upbringing?
So in my family, debt was positioned as the way. The only thing that I really heard the most about was credit cards. Credit cards were bad. Stay away from credit cards. So that was all that I knew. I didn't really understand that payday loans was a form of debt. Getting by pay now, late type furniture was a form of debt. I didn't know all of these other types of things were debt, but that was normalized in my family. So it was normal to go to Rent-A-Center to get a couch or a refrigerator. It was normal to do things like layaways. Like all of those things can be some form of debt, but that was normal and it was a way of survival. It wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that those were different forms of debt that you still can get sucked into and find it very hard to get out.
I remember those layaway days. That was like an annual tradition with back to school season. And now it's just fancy buy now, pay later, but let's call it what it is. That's all that we're doing now with these modern apps. And they're selling it as a very sexy way to like get the things that you quote unquote can't afford to pay for in full. Y'all are just getting into debt and they're calling it something else. All right, Natalia, what about you? So first, what was your story around debt that you learned from your upbringing? And then what was your personal experience with debt?
From my upbringing, I actually didn't learn anything about debt. I just knew that I was supposed to have a savings account. So I didn't know anything about any financial products other than, oh, you're supposed to save. My grandmother would just like stuff dollars in. She had like an old wallet. So that was one thing, but she didn't necessarily always trust banks. My mom taught me to just save a little bit of money every time we get paid. And that didn't always happen. My first encounter with being in debt was getting a furniture set and not understanding that no interest now does not mean that that interest will not, show up all at once. That's the part I didn't understand. I thought I had more time or that interest would start accruing at that date, not that all the interest for the first 18 months would be hit on that 19th month. And that just put me in a hole and I didn't know how to get out of it. And it just took me way longer. And that furniture set ended up being way more expensive than it should have been because I didn't have the money at the time to pay all that interest at once. And once that interest hits, it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing. And it was like, I couldn't get out of that cycle because I could not pay it down fast enough for the balance to not keep increasing. So it just took a really long time. After that, I just swore off buy now, pay later things. They can be really helpful for some people, but I did not have the best experience at all.
Yeah. Unless you really have like a solid plan to take advantage of these promotional periods where you don't pay interest, it's very easy to get into that cycle. So that's a great lead up to my first question for you, Natalia, which is what is, in your opinion, or what have you seen as the most common types of debt that people struggle with the most?
Really with credit card debt and medical debt. I will say those two equally. I think for credit cards, it is definitely store cards. People walk in, you get a 20% discount for that purchase, especially around the holiday season. It sounds like a discount. It looks great. So we have people who have 10, 15 store cards because they took advantage of one promotional discount and then didn't realize like you have now 15 cards to pay off. You went into each store and you said yes, 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 yes. And then for medical debt, it's just really unfortunate. And it's happened to me as well, where you have insurance and you think you're covered and the copays are confusing, your deductibles are confusing. You don't realize that sometimes you have to pay a certain amount before insurance will even kick in. And I see a lot of people, especially in emergency situations, think that they're covered and then they get hit with a medical bill that they can't necessarily handle. And that starts the cycle because now you're trying to pay for your medical bills and you still need to see that doctor, right? So there's always that kind of choice that you have to make between, well, I need medical attention, so I have to pay for this thing. And that puts people in a cycle as well. So in between store cards and medical debt, it is really a vicious cycle for a lot of people that I see.
Yeah, those store cards are something else. Like every time I walk into somewhere, they're like, "Oh, do you want to save 15%?"
You
I was
really
just at where was it, Costco yesterday, and they're like, "Oh, we'll give you like a $50 gift card if you sign up for a membership plus this credit card." And I'm like, "I'm good, y'all. It's not that serious. I don't need your $50 like that. It's not that serious." But it's like they're throwing money at you, and they make it so easy for you to just really get into this spiral situation. So I want to talk to you, Dasha. What are some warning signs that your debt is becoming unmanageable?
So some of the signs that the debt is becoming overwhelmed, or that you're even just struggling with dealing with it, I would say not answering the phone or ignoring calls, not opening the mail. Those are some of the first telltale signs. I know that's what it was for me, because you are scared, to face it. You really don't want to deal with it because you know that it is becoming overwhelming. Also, if you find yourself constantly using credit cards to the point as a mean to survive, those are like telltale signs that's letting you know that it's probably becoming too much, and there's some new things that we have to do here to get it under control.
Yeah, it's like if you feel like you are swimming upstream without a paddle, y'all, it's a good sign that something's got to give. And, for a lot of people, I think the first thing they think about is maybe prioritizing financial goals, right? Of like thinking, is there something that I can kind of offset this money that I need, and maybe I'm going to stop investing, maybe I'm going to stop saving. I'm curious from your perspective, Natalia, do you think that you should prioritize debt payoff if at the expense of like future long-term building, like investing and saving?
So it depends on your goals, right? And like the answer is not going to be the same for everyone, but generally, yes, you want to take care of your debt. If you have any financial goals that include getting a new car, getting a house, moving to a new apartment, you're going to need a good credit score. So I would say you have to prioritize your debt. And if you can also do savings at the same time. You just have to figure out what you can afford. It's being honest about what your goals are, deciding if you actually make enough money to meet those goals, and then it's making up a plan for resolving the debt so that you can have a healthy credit score to do the other things that you want to do in the future. So sometimes you have to take a step back to take several steps forward. It makes it a whole lot easier if you really understand where you want to go. Then you can create a plan. And once you have a plan, like Dasha said, anxiety can subside for sure when you actually know where you're going. Avoiding it is only going to make it worse.
So you talk about making a plan. Obviously, that's something around a budget. And I'm curious from your perspective, Dasha, what should a person think about when they're creating a budget that is specifically geared towards debt payoff? Is there a certain percentage of income that you should be sending towards your debt? Are there some of your favorite tools or apps that you would recommend for like tracking your progress? What's your take on this?
So for me, I think that I am a person who switches between different types of budget. So if right now your priority is to pay off debt, I think that you need to create a budget that centers that, just like you would if you were trying to go on a trip or if you're trying to save for something. That will be the focal point of your financial goals. So I think having a budget that's centered around paying off debt is very important. And it will look the exact same way that we would treat every other expense in our budget. We will make it a item line and we will put money towards that. I think when it comes to budgeting, especially when you're paying off debt, sometimes we think as an add-on, what it should be included into our monthly expenses. Like, this is something that I know I'm going to pay towards to every month, regardless if I don't answer the phone, regardless if I don't open the mail. I am treating this like a monthly expense. So I think that it's important to have a budget that centers around debt. And I don't really like to suggest percentages because it's going to look different for everybody. So I think my biggest piece of advice is this is when you're really going to have to get intimate with your finances. Like, you need to know what's going on, what's coming in, what's going out, so that you can make a decision to say, okay, hey, after going through all of my expenses, all of my income, I know now that I could probably put a couple of extra $50, $100 towards this debt payment to speed it up. So there's tons of trackers out there that you can use. I am a Microsoft Excel girl to the heart. I do not use a lot of apps, but there's a ton of apps that you can use out there to track. You can just look in your app store. But I definitely think it's important to also track progress, because that builds momentum, it builds motivation, and you can see that it really is possible.
Yeah. Those psychological wins, I think, are important for you to physically see as you're making that progress. I know when I was on my own debt payoff journey, I would check in very regularly with my budgeting app because I just wanted to see like the actual progress of every time I made a payment. So I've always kind of feared having bad credit. And so I think that's always kept me, even when I was in debt, I was always like paying it on time. And some of the things that I was able to take advantage of because of good credit was things like balance transfer offers, where I would move my credit card balances onto a new card that has a promotional 0% interest rate. And I could make a solid plan to like pay off debt in that way. I also did consolidate my student loans after graduating. So instead of having a bunch of different lenders to pay. I would have the one payment. Now, that's great if you can take advantage of those opportunities if you have good credit. But if you're in a situation where your credit is not great, your options are way more limited. So let's talk about kind of what those options are when your credit is not stellar, Natalia. I know a lot of folks think initially of like, do I just file for bankruptcy? Like, what are my options here?
Yeah, there's still more options before bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is so detrimental, and it's a long-term 7 to 10 years on your credit report. So if the goal is to get back into a financial good standing and good credit, that's probably not the best route for a lot of people. Bankruptcy also, there's two different kinds, right? Just to be clear for everyone, there's one where you can have everything wiped out, but it is very intrusive. That means someone else is deciding what your assets are. That could be your rings, it could be your house, your car, whatever valuables you have to offset your debt. So it's very intrusive. They can take those things away to sell them, and then you're technically wiped clean, right? Then there's the other one where you're just in a long-term payment plan. A lot of people end up in these plans and they fail out of bankruptcy, and then they start back at the beginning. There's a lot of upfront fees where you have to pay your attorney first. There's no guarantee that you'll even be qualified for bankruptcy, even if you pay that attorney. So it's always, my opinion is to make it the very, very last option. Before that, there's something called debt settlement. Debt settlement is where National Debt Relief is a debt settlement company that helps people reduce their balance, and they get out of debt between 12 and 48 months for their unsecured debt. So that is another option where you will actually get out of debt faster. You get to a point where eventually you can rebuild your credit faster than bankruptcy, and you actually have your monthly cash flow can actually increase, because we'll take a look at all of those debts, get a low monthly program payment, and then that immediately makes a lot of people feel a lot better, because if you're paying 10 different cards and the minimums are against all those cards are $50 to $100, that is a lot of money going out, but we can give a much lower program payment. And it really does help people start to save while they're in a debt settlement program sometimes, because now your cash flow is a little bit higher.
How do you know if you're a good candidate for debt settlement?
Like we talked about earlier, if you are hiding from those bills, if your income is not covering all of your expenses, if some people have just gone through life changes where maybe there was a medical situation and it put them behind, maybe they were laid off, maybe they were going through a divorce. And really, if there is just not enough income coming in to cover all of those debts, or you have long-term financial goals where you want to rebuild credit, those are great reasons to actually just give us a call. We don't charge any upfront fees. Consultation is free. We kind of like to go through every single step to make sure that anyone is a good candidate. So if anyone is curious, they can just give us a call, and they can find out if they qualify or not.
Can we talk about what the impact is on your credit when you go with debt settlement versus bankruptcy? Like, what's that impact from a time perspective?
From a time perspective, debt settlement will make your credit go down, or if you're already delinquent, your credit is already not in a good place. So it can't go much further. So there is a short-term impact with debt settlement from 12 to 48 months while you're in the program, and then it starts to rebuild because your debt to income ratio will essentially just be in a better place. And with bankruptcy, it is 7 to 10 years. Once you file bankruptcy, it's on your credit report. I don't have specific numbers, but it is detrimental. If you go to get an apartment, if you want to buy a car, that's the first thing that they look at. Your credit score is going to be impacted for far much longer. And there's not much you can do about that, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you pay on time. It doesn't matter if you were able to get a new credit card to try to rebuild your credit. Bankruptcy will keep your credit at a very low score for a very long time.
Now, what if someone's listening to this and they're like, well, why do I need to hire a debt settlement company when I could just potentially call my creditors and negotiate either an interest rate reduction or even maybe a balance reduction?
You can. And I like to say, if you're the type of person that can handle that and keep on top of it, by all means. The reality is we're all busy people, and keeping track of multiple cards, knowing when you should negotiate, knowing what a good rate is, having support during that process is an option for everyone, but that's what we offer, right? This is a service to, one, use our expertise to understand what the best rates are, to have people being an advocate for you with each individual creditor. We actually have relationships with a lot of creditors as well. So there might be exclusive rates that we can get for our client base that you may not get on your own. And it's just that transparency there, right? Where we know based on what we do, what's good and what's not. an individual doing it, a creditor may take advantage of you not knowing, right? So I think that's the push and pull there is you can do it on your own, but do you know if you're doing it the right and best way?
Well, and I would argue too, though, if you're already delinquent with a creditor, they're probably not going to really believe what you have to say as far as like what you're trying to negotiate versus working with a partner like National Debt Relief. Like they already know you guys have a track record. They know
Right.
that you work with clients who have had success and you're going to hold them accountable to their goals in a way that maybe, you as an individual just won't be able to, for whatever
Right.
reason. So I think it kind of gives you leverage in that situation.
100%.
Let's talk about like what the average balance reduction is when you work with National Debt Relief. Like what can that look like potentially from like a percentage standpoint?
So we actually are able to reduce balances by about 50 to 55%, and we do charge a fee. So after our fees, we typically save clients about 30% of their original balance. So it's a significant savings, and you're also out between 12 and 48 months. So larger balances tend to take longer, but our average client is around 36 months, around there, where they've seen a 30% reduction. And there's also kind of the invisible interest that eventually will stop that we've also saved those clients. Because if you were just paying the minimum balance, you can pay double or triple the amount of debt that you have. But when you come into the program, you actually get a reduction of about 30% with fees.
Now, social media is rampant with folks who are out here claiming that they can fix your credit, they can help you take care of your debt. What is the potential danger of working with someone who's, spouting that they can actually do this versus working with an established organization like National Debt Relief?
I always say do your research. We go on shopping websites and we look at all the reviews before we purchase. I recommend the same exact thing for any debt settlement company or a company claiming that they can do credit repair, all of those things. You have to do your research. We are accredited by the BBB. We've won awards from Forbes 2 years in a row. We have I think over 15,000 reviews on Trustpilot. You can go to our Google, you can read the reviews on the BBB site. Do that for any financial institution that you're looking to partner with and make sure that they're accredited, make sure that they have a good track record, make sure they've been in business for some time because there's a lot of companies popping up here and there pretending to be something that they're not. And I just want to make sure that people are careful, especially when it comes to trying to do the right thing and your financial life on track. There are people out there who will want to take advantage of that. So definitely do research.
Yes, absolutely, y'all. Trust but verify. That is how I
Always.
live my life. All right. So paying off debt is more than just a strategic plan, working with National Debt Relief or, doing it yourself. There's a lot of like mental stuff that comes along with this. I want to talk to you, Dasha. How does someone overcome the emotional stress and the shame of being in debt? Because I think that can be the thing that forces you to not even confront your situation and like start making a plan to fix it.
Yeah, so this was one of the things that I've enjoyed the most about partnering with National Debt Relief is because it reduces the stigma of seeking out professional help. And so when I think of a person being ashamed of debt or having any anxiety about it, I think about everything that we see on social media. So we see people on social media and they're paying off like hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt in 6 months. That is overwhelming. I'm going to be honest. Sometimes that's overwhelming. It starts to make you feel like, okay, this isn't possible. I can do this myself. And you really, at that point, don't even want to do it. So I think creating safe spaces, having the right conversations, meeting people that normalizes the conversations about debt and normalizing seeking professional help, it helps get over a lot of that shame and anxiety. I mean, we cover debt very well on our platforms. It's a topic that, of course, we wish that one day it would not have to be normal where everyone is dealing with some type of debt, but that's the reality of the world. So I think having spaces where we are championing people like, hey, if you only can pay off a little bit at a time, that's okay. If you can drop your budget down to the bare bones and throw all of your extra money towards debt, that's okay too. I think what I've tried to do so much on my platform is to normalize the conversations that don't get a lot of the attention. Like you may only be able to make the minimum payment, but at least least you have started. You may need more help. So it's okay to get professional help. It's okay to ask the right questions. So I think having a safe space, asking the right questions, and just covering debt in a way that humanizes the experience plays a major part in removing some of the anxiety and shame and the mental impact that we have when it comes to dealing with debt as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be realistic too. Unless you are independently wealthy or you have parents who can drop a couple $100,000 on, new house for you or can buy you cars in cash, like we're going to have to take out debt to accomplish major financial goals that we have in life, especially if you're first gen and you don't have a lot of access to like generational resources. So there's nothing wrong inherently with debt. In fact, it can be used very strategically to create empires of wealth. We see the rich doing it all the time. It's really just about understanding how you can leverage it as a tool instead of it being a weapon that can be used against you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm curious, you've worked with a ton of people on their debt payoff journeys. What habits do you see in people who successfully pay off debt and stay out of debt?
So what I've seen the most on my platform is people that are focusing on their own journey, people that are being realistic when they are creating a plan. Like, yes, we want to be optimistic, but if you know that you cannot spare an extra $500 per month, you don't have to build your debt repayment plan around that. So I've seen the most success in people that are realistic. They are creating plans that are sustainable and they are chipping away at it slowly but surely. One of the things that I've seen the most and what I've also tried to encourage my audience to believe is that slow is not bad. Slow is not wrong. And that's okay, especially if you're still able to maintain your quality of life in other areas. So the biggest part that I've seen when it comes to success and repaying debt is choosing a journey that works for you.
Now, I know that you also speak to a lot of women, Dasha, in your business. And sometimes these women can be in partnerships with folks who don't necessarily have the same mindset around paying off debt and the importance of saving and planning for the future. What advice do you have for couples who might be on like completely different pages about how to manage their debt?
So something that I tell people a lot is that when I was married and I'm also divorced, and I'm real honest and blunt about that because money played a major part in that. So there's no getting around it. There's no being on two different pages because you're either going to be on the same page while you're together or you're going to be on the same page when you're getting divorced. Because I try to avoid those conversations about money and debt in my marriage only to be forced to talk about them with the lawyers and judges in the courtroom. So there's no getting around it. I think coming into a relationship, a marriage of any sort, we're both individuals, probably had two completely different upbringings. So we're going to have our own ideas around money management, around debt, but it is so important as a couple when you're wanting to work together as a unit to be on the same page. It does not mean that you have to do everything the exact same, but there should be some shared values around what debt means, what debt looks like for us as a couple. How are we going to manage it together and individually? I think that that's one of the most important conversations that a couple can have when it comes to money covering debt, because I've seen what that looks like in the courtroom. That literally is what you're talking about in the courtroom. Who's going to be responsible for what? Who's going to pay what? Who got into what debt during the marriage? Now who's responsible for it in the divorce? There's no way around it. So I champion that to be one of the first conversations that couples decide to get on the same page about.
I mean, it's important because I think it's a lot easier to have these conversations when you actually still like each other versus when you're hashing things out in court and just trying to like make each other's lives miserable. So, all right. So both of you actually talked about how your lack of financial literacy around the topic of debt was part of the reason why you both found yourselves in situations where you were confronting debt in a negative way. I'm curious for you, Natalia, how does National Debt Relief help folks not just figure out their plan for getting out of debt, but also support them with the information and the education, the knowledge so that they don't have to necessarily come back to you guys because they found themselves in this situation again in the future?
I love that you said that because that is absolutely the goal. We don't want people to come back. So we actually have a bunch of free programs for our clients to go through. So there are people like Dasha on our financial wellness board that they have access to. There are some free educational tools that they can have access to as well. And we write our own blogs. I've even gotten on our Instagram reels and given some information around the stigmas around debt and making sure that people understand that being in debt is not necessarily a reflection of who you are. It is something that happened. It doesn't define the individual. So we do a lot of psychological kind of blogs to make sure that people understand that this is a journey, that this happens to a lot of people. We also have a Facebook community so that our clients can commune with each other, because the best advice sometimes, or the best comfort, comes from other people who are in your situation. So we try to build an entire ecosystem for education and safety and destigmatizing all of these stereotypes that come across, and then making sure that our clients not only just get out of debt, but also feel better about who they are and defining that they were able to accomplish something and get to the point that they want to in their financial journey.
I think that community aspect is such a big part of destigmatizing this whole situation, right? Because the more that you can just be honest about what you're going through, the more you'll realize that you're not alone, okay? There's a lot of people that are going through this, but it can feel very isolating when you are dealing with that shame and that guilt and feeling like I should know better. The fact of the matter is most of us are not learning financial literacy either at home or in school. And so unless you have, been bitten by the bug because you were hanging out somewhere on social media, or you just happen to listen to a podcast or something like that, you're not necessarily going to know how all of this stuff works. So I think the most important thing is understand there are solutions here. There are a lot of resources out here, and both you, Dasha, and you, Natalia, are part of organizations who are really helping folks understand that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Dasha, can you tell us where we can find you on social media?
Yes, so across all social media platforms is at The Broke Black Girl, and that's my website as well, thebrokeblackgirl.com.
Amazing. And she has tons of resources, y'all, so that you can go from broke to ballin'. Okay, so make sure to check that out. And Natalia, tell us where we can find out more information about National Debt Relief.
Sure. We are at nationaldebtrelief.com, and you can also follow us on Instagram at National Debt Relief.
Amazing. I want to thank you both for the work that you're doing. It really is such an important resource for our community so that we can get out of these cycles of generational poverty. There's too much information out here, y'all, for us to continue to perpetuate that. So let's get educated. Let's know what our options are. And most importantly, let's make sure we're starting off the new year, if you are in debt right now, that you were going to create a plan so that this time next year, you can be celebrating, making progress, instead of feeling like you were just reliving the same unfortunate nightmare over and over and over again. All right. Thank you both for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.